right, so thank you everybody for coming to the class tonight. And what we're going to do this evening is we're going to talk about stress that's happened particularly this year. And I have to go back and kind of rewind a little bit for me because when I was, um, you know, celebrating New Year's Eve with my wife, we discussed what a hard year 2019 was, and that we both had a really good feeling that 2020 was just going to be a great year. And we both tease each other about that right now because this has been anything but a great year and an incredibly challenging year on so many different levels. So I've had to, somebody who's taught things about stress for this many years, kind of go back and take out all my notes and review my notes and use my own stress classes information to try and help me get through this year. And we've had all the changes that have happened with COVID. We've had all the changes that have occurred with it and its effect on our practice and business, my staff, everybody that I'm responsible for to take care of on so many different levels, and my family, of course, which is one of my top priorities, has been hit pretty hard in that we suffered the loss of my mom in the middle of this. We had our cat die just a couple of weeks after my mom passed. Her whole estate and everything has been thrust upon my shoulders as I am the oldest, most responsible one in her eyes. So I got the blessing of trying to take care of all of her stuff on top of everything else, and deal with the emotions of my mom passing, and then the emotions of us losing our little family pet that we've had for 15 plus years. So there's been a lot, to say the least, and I'm leaving a whole bunch of other stuff out just for time's sake. But it's been an incredibly stressful year for us. So the things that I'm going to be talking about this evening are not stuff that's just foo-foo. It's not something I just teach. It's things that I live by that have helped me deal with all of the things that are going on around us right now. And I want to share that with you because like I said, I've been teaching this stuff for 25 years or more. I'm constantly compiling research. I've read so many books, so much literature on this topic. And there's no doubt in my mind that the number one reason that people suffer on any level is some form of stress is the problem. So the four basic questions that we want to ask ourselves is, and I want to review with you tonight, is what is stress? Where does it come from? What does it do to our bodies? And what can we do about it to help change this phenomena that occurs in our systems and keeping us from being sick because of it? And what we do is that we look at our society right now, and we're stressed, and where just 6 months ago, if somebody had a cough, nobody really paid much attention to it. If somebody sneezed, there was a polite "God bless you." Now people are pulling handguns out in stores if somebody sneezes on them. It's a whole different time. People are being beaten and dragged out because they don't have masks on, ridiculed on different levels. We live in a whole different world, afraid of our kids going to school. Teachers are afraid of catching diseases from the kids. Things that were just not stuff we never even thought about before or could possibly be in the realm are little fears and upsetment. And at the same time, stress typically comes from a sense of not knowing and a combination of what our mind creates from the not knowing. So I need you to just kind of hold on to that for a second and sit with that, because if I go through a definition of stress and I read this is right out of the text, right? Medical books, textbooks. This is what it says. It is generally believed that all biological organisms require a certain amount of stress in order to maintain their well-being. We have to have some level of stress in order to be healthy. There's no doubt about that. We exercise and our muscles break down because of the stress and we come back stronger. And so our immune systems, we catch a cold, we get sick, they figure out how to defeat that sickness, and our immune systems are now stronger because of that stress. We have to fight gravity every day to get ourselves up off the ground and out of bed. And we're constantly fighting against that stress. Those things are healthy. Yet, when stress occurs in quantities that the system cannot handle, it produces pathological changes. That means our bodies start to break down and we start to develop diseases of some sort. And every disease that we eventually die from is because of too much stress on our system. That's basically it. That's the bottom line. The silver bullet is that we're stressed. And I would contend that the life that we're living, the world around us as human beings, has never been more stressful than it is right now. Never. And I'm going to explain to you why, because we're getting hit from so many different angles that our bodies are being bombarded with stressful stuff constantly. And basically, what I wrote in the bottom PS, we all die from too much stress one way or the other, whether it's getting hit by a bus or very slowly dying from diabetes or some heart condition or cancer. It's always some type of stress that's going to take us out. So this fight or flight mechanism that's in our bodies is a normal instinct that's supposed to occur anytime we're stressed. So it is, if you look it up, stress is a necessary temporary survival reaction to our environment. And I highlighted environment there for a reason. We'll come back to that in a second, that we perceive as being extreme or dangerous. So way back when we were we would have to go hunt. It would be stressful to go hunt because if we didn't find dinner, we would have a problem not eating and not being able to provide for our families. That's an issue. That could be stressful. And what that adrenaline release, which we'll talk about in a little bit, into our systems would do when we hunt is hone us into certain parts of our brain and certain functions that allowed us to be more acute at certain events, to be able to hunt or to be able to run if something was going to be hunting us, and then have that adrenaline hit our system in such a way that would make our muscles twitch, our nervous system more fired up, and dump sugar and all kinds of stuff into our bloodstream rapidly for energy. The problem we face now is that once we get this adrenaline and cortisol release into our systems, we're having stress at a kitchen table. We're having stress in front of a computer screen. We're having stress in a car. We're having stress sitting, watching the news in our favorite chair at night. And so we're not getting the actual physical movement that made this an okay event. So by dumping these adrenaline and cortisol hormones into our system, which are sometimes, like I said, a healthy thing to have in our bodies, but if we do it for too long, on too consistent a pattern without any physical movement or exercise, then that cortisol level starts to attach into cells and stays on those cells and actually affects how they function. And in a lot of worlds and a lot of research, we believe that that constant high level of stress is actually the single solitary underlying reason people end up with type 2 diabetes. It isn't necessarily that your parents had it, that you got a gene. And even if it was a gene, as we'll talk to in a little bit, it still has to be triggered by something. And that means there still has to be stress that fires that gene up that puts you into that state. And we also know that if you exercise and eat right and remove stress from your body, type 2 diabetics very often can reverse that process over 90+% of the time. So that's a big thing to know and to hold on to. And I've done classes on that. We teach on that. I've brought other doctors in and researchers and nutritionists that talk about that very topic because it is near and dear to my heart. And Dr. Greg Armstrong currently is doing classes in our office almost every month to try and help teach patients on how to reverse some of those processes from the stress that people's bodies have been under. So these two hormones have a profound effect on how our bodies function, and it happens in just seconds, fractions of seconds sometimes, of dumping that adrenaline into our systems. And we all have felt that moment of maybe some type of rage or some type of excitement or some type of something that where that just that dump of adrenaline goes into our system, and then we don't go anywhere. So without that exercise, and if it stays constant, then it becomes an issue. And one of the big issues I see is that some people are so stressed, they don't even know when they're under stress anymore. So their bodies are so tense and so tight, and they just think this is a normal way of living their lives. That this stress that they have, and what do? They go to foods to try and find ways to have comfort, or they'll drink too much because they're so stressed out and they need to find a way to medicate themselves out of that stressful event. Oh, I had such a hard day, so I'm going to drink 2 bottles of wine tonight instead of have a glass of wine tonight. Now tomorrow stinks too because now you just drank 2 bottles of wine last night. You feel terrible on top of all your stress, but nothing really got resolved. So that handled nothing other than making you feel worse. And I'm going to actually explain why we make really stupid choices, if I'm allowed to say it that way, when we're under stress. And there's a reason. And so we'll talk about that too. And it can be corrected. So we can't handle the long-term exposure without our body suffering some type of damage, because the very nature of it, we're going to talk about in a little bit, is how the body reacts when these things happen. So you'll see why having it long-term is not good. So stress comes in 3 forms. So there's physical, chemical, and mental. And, there was a time as a chiropractor where most of what I talked about was physical stresses on people's bodies and the occasional mental stress that somebody would experience. Well, years went by of being a doctor, and now over the last 10 years or so, it became very obvious to us that what's happening in our external environment is that we were having genetically modified foods. We're having chemical additives added to our foods, and less than 10% of the food that's in our grocery store is actually food that was available 40 years ago. Meaning your body hasn't even had time to adapt or genetically change to learn how to figure out how to handle the chemical stress, let alone how to handle that the food that we're eating is completely different than it was just 20 years ago. For example, a couple of days ago, I was out running around with my son, and we're getting ready. Well, before we left the house, he was eating an apple, and we had to leave quickly, so I put the apple down and I left it on the kitchen counter, and I ran out of the house. Of course, my wife would have been mad if she saw me do that, but we ran out of the house. We did our thing. We come back hours later, and that apple had still not turned brown yet. So the apple's not oxidizing. Now, I remember being a kid, I couldn't bite an apple and even eat it fast enough to get to the other side, and that apple was starting to turn brown and oxidize. So whatever we've done genetically to try and make our food supply last longer from picking to shelf to your home is genetically changing how that actually food is being made and how it's actually reacting to the environment. Now, if it can't oxidize from air, then you have to know that it has to be much harder to digest when we eat it. If it can't break down, it can't break down. And so trying to extract vital nutrients from foods, even from an apple or fruit or vegetables, things that we perceive as being very healthy, and they're still healthier than some of the other boxes of food that we have in the supermarket, where the sides of it has more chemicals on it than food, but it's quick and it's easy. And so we go to that because we're all so busy, we don't have time. So the fruits and vegetables are still better than that. And of course, organic is better than whatever's in the section over that's cheaper. It's a little more expensive, but that's more food-like to your body than what we typically put in it. So now we have this whole chemical stress. We put so many chemicals on our body. There's so much chemicals in our food, outside of us, that we're exposed to. There's all kinds of talks and conversations we're going to go into with Monsanto and the pesticides and all this kind of stuff that we see commercials for causing cancer now. I mean, we've been talking about this stuff for a long time, and it's only recently that we're starting to see them actually admit that, oh yeah, well, maybe. Anyway, now we had mental stress. And mental stress was something like somebody was having a hard time in a relationship, somebody was having an issue with family, kids, something like that. There would be an event that would cause somebody stress. Now, we don't ever get out of it. We wake up in the morning and we're seeing stressful stuff. We turn on the news, there's stressful stuff. We can't get away from stress right now. So we have a constant bombardment of stress that we're being exposed to, that we have to deal with on top of everything else, the chemical stress and the physical stress that our bodies have been exposed to. And it's all happened in such a short period of time that it's affecting us on a much higher level, faster and harder than ever before. And there we go. So where does stress come from? The first question is, and let me go back 1 second, because when I read this to you earlier, so stress is a necessary temporary, hopefully temporary, survival reaction to our environment, meaning that something outside of us has created such a stressful thing that our bodies trigger this whole adrenaline dump, and we have this reaction to what's occurring in the environment because we perceive it to be dangerous. A lot of our stress that we're experiencing right now is the fear of unknown. And when I say that, we currently live in an environment where we don't know, and the brain needs to know. In order for it to be able to process thought, it has to know something to build the next thought into. So when you put a whole society into we don't know, and when the people that we look up to as doctors, they don't know, or if somebody says they know, there's somebody on the other side that says that person, what they said isn't right. Now we can't even really know who's telling us the truth when it comes to the doctors. When we're taking research, as I've never seen it before, we live in a society where the research is actually being tampered with, manipulated into a belief, rather than saying, oh, that's cool new research. How do we apply that? So people are using the research and manipulating the research to create an outcome based on their view of the research, not necessarily what the research is saying. Does that make sense? So we're not, I've never seen this before. I see research being published in articles and papers, and then they're pulled. And we can't find them anymore. New England Journal of Medicine, The Lancet, top journals, top places. I see something and I go, wow, that's an incredible piece of research. How can I apply that? And then 2 months later, I can't even find it anymore. Somebody's yanked it. And so somebody complained, or somebody said no, but that never, once something was published, it was published, and that was the end of it. Now we're losing data and losing information, and things are being manipulated. And I can't go into a political conversation in this forum. And I try and avoid that always in the office, because it is a hot topic, and I'm trying to get everybody to calm down, not get fired up when they come in, and reduce stress when they come in. So I will not have those conversations with my patients. But I want you to know that we have two opposite worlds of thought. So even if we had the one piece of information, Biden's going to say one thing and Trump's going to say the other. And so we can't even get straight answers from them. We can't get straight answers from the news, because the people that are giving the news the information, they don't know. And because doctors like us that are trying to get the right information to give to our patients, we try and give you as much accurate information as we can. But I've never seen anything like this before. So we create this unknowingness in our society where we don't know what's coming. We don't know how to be guided, because the people that typically guide us don't have the answers anymore, or at least don't seem to. And if we do have them, it seems to change so rapidly that if we're not keeping up, in the last 3 months of research, the data's been completely changed. So if we're not, as doctors, keeping up with everything that's happening, then what if you looked at something 3 months ago and you've been too busy to keep up with research, you're so far behind that 8 ball, you don't even know how to guide your patients, because what you're telling them probably isn't true anymore. So let's skip back ahead, because we need to talk about, does things come from the inside out or the outside in? And this is something, if you have a pad and pen, write this down. If you want to, I can print some of this stuff out for you and just give you the slides. um, the printout when you come in to see me. But the key bottom line is that everything has to come from the outside into us to cause stress, but we have to process it. So what might be really stressful for one person may not be stressful for another person because the same event is being perceived differently by those two people. This is really important. And I go back to events in my life where I thought I saw something, and then everybody else saw something else, and I was like, well, I thought I saw it, but I didn't. Or did I see it and they didn't see it? And it was the exact same event observed by different people at the same time, but we can see things differently based on how our brains perceive what just happened. As much as going to a crime scene, a police officer, I remember years ago coming to a stress class, said he used to hate going to accident scenes because if it was an older person and a kid, if somebody didn't like kid drivers, then they were like, it's the kid's fault. And if somebody didn't like old people driving, then they like, it's the old person's fault. And it's never about what really happened in the accident. It was about their perception. And sadly, a lot of what we're seeing right now is like that. We're seeing a lot of stuff based on this closed-minded opinion and not an open mind of what can we learn from this event. And that creates a lot of stress in our bodies. The key thing for us to try and find any peace in anything that's going on is really to go back to the one question is, what can we control? And I've taken this conversation down with patients before, and to save time, I will tell you that it always comes down to thought. And people will say, I can control my thoughts. And that's really all I have control over, because we don't have ultimate control over our children. We don't have ultimate control over our spouse. We don't have ultimate control over our friends and family. We can't make other people do stuff, right? You can tell a kid, don't do that how many times and they still do it. You can't just make people do that. We try and guide people and we offer assistance to people to try and show them there's a better way. I can't even make as a doctor, I can't make patients want to be healthy. I can't make them want to do the work. I can present to them and say, I have a plan for you that can get you well. I've seen patients like you with this condition get well so many times, but you have to be willing to do the work to get there. You have to be willing to do the work with stress in order to get yourself out of some of the things that are causing the stress and the triggers in our environment, as well as in your mind say, what do I really have control over here? So if we can think, oh, well, I can control my thoughts, I would question even that, because I know I've been sitting in places and go, where did that thought come from? I didn't have control over that. I don't even know why I'm thinking about that right now. And so we don't even really have control over all of our thoughts. So it's hard to say the word control. It's kind of an issue, yet most of our stressful situations come from us trying to control other people, other circumstances, and things in our environment that we have no control over. Again, powerful moment, powerful concept. You need, and this is something I do with myself all the time, is when I see my family doing something wrong, what are you doing? But you can only say that so many times before I'm the one who's going crazy and they're running around in la la land thinking everything's fine. And I think I'm the only one making myself sick worrying about them. And so, but they have no desire to make anything different in their life. And so I have to, my wife and I call it being in our bubble. And so we kid around about this, but we came up with it a long time ago, and we just have conversations about it because we realize that inside our bubble, everything's really good. The only things we end up fighting about or having issues with is not each other. It's always other people's problems. And so we keep reminding ourselves when we go off on these little tangents, we bring each other back in and say, let's get back in our bubble. And so you can call it whatever you want, but I highly recommend you come up with something that you and your spouse can use with each other to be able to say, let's reel it in. Everything in here is good. This is great. This is great. This is great. This is great. This isn't, but this isn't something I have any control over. And try and start to do some journaling and do some writing about the things that we worry about and think about that has nothing to do with us. because everything that you can take off your mind and every little bit of less stress you can have is desperately needed right now for our ultimate health. So responsibility, and I like breaking it down like this, and I've done this for over 20 years, is I break it down and I fight with the computer every time because it wants to spell check me and tell me it's wrong. And so, but I like the word responsibility, meaning we have the ability to respond. And rather than just be in a situation and stew in a situation, we always have the ability to respond. We may not know how to respond oftentimes, and there's countless books that say that you just, you know what, respond, do something. It's because it's better than just sitting there worrying about it, thinking about it, being afraid about it. Because then, of course, there might even be some activity level that might help you undo some of the effects of the stress. And we talked about how we perceive reality. That's critical. And the the mind-body connection, neuroplasticity, is something that we're starting to understand, meaning that we're creatures of habit. Neuroplasticity means that once you learn how to do something, the brain consistently wants to do it over and over again. And the best example of this is driving down the road and you're thinking about something and you just went like 5 miles and you stopped at every red light and you did everything and you went, oh, how did I get here? Or even the other side of it is like, oh, I missed my exit. How did I pass my exit? I didn't even see it because we were so deep in thought that our brains were running that neuroplastic pattern and not really even fully engaging on what was going on around us at the moment. You get up every morning and you brush your teeth the same way, wash yourself the same way in the shower, you use the exact same order. We're creatures of pattern and habit. And that's what neuroplasticity is. This is big in chiropractic because one of the things we're trying to do with patients is we're trying to recreate a new neuroplasticity for you because we're trying to train your body how to be healthy again. And we have to undo all the habits and all the movements and all the things that you've done when you first walk in our door. That's a lot easier for a child than it is for somebody 40, 50, 60 years old and been doing these things this way for that long. So sometimes it takes time to change a person's body, but it can be done because we have to just recreate new habits and new patterns. The prefrontal cortex is the very front part of your brain. And I could spend about a 3 or 4 hour class on this, but I want you to understand. I'm going to list to you a few things that the prefrontal cortex controls. And this is straight out of the research from one of my conferences that I go to as a doctor. And I got to get that out of there because we're already running out of time. So mental health, your immune system, inflammation, hormones, your digestive system, pain responses, your ability to sleep, high blood pressure, heart rate, and ability to have attention and focus comes from the prefrontal cortex. The moment that you are under stress, your prefrontal cortex shuts off. And what does that do? We release adrenaline and cortisol into the system. We shut down that prefrontal cortex, makes nerve endings hypersensitive. We have blood flow changes that increase our blood pressure and decrease our heart function. We increase blood sugar. So we have energy for this fight or flight to take off and run or do whatever we have to do, but then we don't go anywhere. So what happens to that sugar? It gets stored in our body as fat. And you do it long enough, you have fat around your internal organs and fat around your belly, and belly fat is the classic place to deposit when we are stressed, is around our abdomen. It lowers our immune responses, which makes infections, autoimmune diseases, and cancer rapidly progress, or may even be the ultimate cause of them on some level. And if anybody who's trying to fight it has cancer and has a lot of stress, then their ability to fight that cancer is in a lot of trouble. So we have to find ways to decrease stress in order to be able to give us the best chance to fight these diseases. Having the amount of stress that we have with COVID out there makes us more vulnerable to having a worse impact because our immune systems are lowered because of the amount of stress that we're under, because of this level of stress that we have makes us more vulnerable to the infection. It makes us this more susceptible, as I say, it makes it worse. So it thinks about, and it changes the blood flow to the brain. It takes all the blood away from the thinking parts, shuts down that prefrontal cortex so that we can hone in on our most basic instincts. And so it will say food, I'm hungry. I'm going to eat. I'm not doing this because I don't feel like it. And it becomes a more feeling brain instead of a thinking brain. So the decisions that we make when we're under stress are more guided by how we feel than what we think. And that produces typically, as I mentioned earlier, more stress. So you say, well, I just feel like getting drunk tonight when I'm stressed because I had such a stressful day. Like that's going to help. It doesn't fix or change anything, except the way that you're going to feel tomorrow morning is going to be much worse. Or you turn to sugary and high salt foods when you're under stress, which further affects your blood pressure, further affects the sugar in your bloodstream, further affects the pressure in your pancreas and the cells in your body, and is throwing you into a type 2 diabetic rage. So these are the types of things that are happening. So let's talk about what we can do about it. We can change first. Thing has to happen. We have to change our perception of the thing that's causing us the stress. Do I have control over this? You need to ask yourself. Is this something that needs to be outside my bubble? Or is this something I need to work on in my mind and with the people around me to make this stress stop? Can we recognize and change the behaviors that make stress worse? Can you be aware of the fact that in a stressful moment, me eating chocolate cake is not a good idea? And in order to do that, we need to be able to reactivate that prefrontal cortex, which can only happen in only two proven ways. One is with a chiropractic adjustment, because there's plenty of documentation that shows that when you get adjusted, that feeling part of the brain turns off and the thinking part of the brain turns on, and you're able to stimulate all these other functions that you couldn't have before. And so when people get adjusted, they say, well, doc, I seem like I don't really get sick as often as I used to. That's because that prefrontal cortex is signaling your immune system to function better when you get an adjustment. Digestive issues improve. Prefrontal cortex is communicating with your body better. We've calmed your whole nervous system down with the adjustment. And I can go on and on and on, every single thing. Do we help kids with attention deficit disease? Yeah. Why? Because the prefrontal cortex is getting activated again. And that's what a chiropractic adjustment has the most impact on, is the function of your brain. And that gives you the ability to calm down and make better decisions. And then it's easier for you to say, oh, you know what? Maybe I shouldn't drink too much tonight. Maybe I shouldn't eat that chocolate cake. Maybe I should go for a walk because I actually feel a little better now, because my pain response isn't as high as it was earlier today. And it puts you in the best place to make the best decisions for your body and your health moving forward. So I'll put this up there. 23,000 people adhere to 4 simple behaviors: not smoking, exercising for 3.5 hours a week, eating healthy diets, and maintaining a healthy weight. And what happened? 93% of them, they decreased their chances of diabetes by 93%, 81% less heart attacks, 50% less strokes, and 38% less cancers. And there are some cancers that responded much higher and some cancers that responded much lower to these simple things. 23,000 people studied over a long period of time. We don't have to do a lot, but we have to move. We have to go for a walk. We don't have to go crazy powerlifting at the gym twice a day. That's physical fitness, but it's not always health. Running marathons, great, good for you. But every time you do that, you're damaging your heart a little bit. And so people who are bodybuilders and powerlifters and marathon runners don't typically, there may be a few out there, but they don't typically live as long as the average person, because the amount of stress they've added to their bodies instead of exercising in a way like a walk or swimming or a slow bike ride. And we all want this big, fast, quick, I gotta lose weight. I'm on it. But what is that? That's stress. It's the slow, steady, building into new healthy patterns of exercise, being able to move better, being able to do all these things that makes the biggest difference. So chiropractic care, number one most important thing, because without the brain functioning right, none of this other stuff matters. But exercise is critical to undo all the effects of cortisol, like I mentioned earlier. Pulls it off, burns it up, pulls it off all your cells. They all function better when we exercise. Our brains work better when we exercise. There's tons of research on that our mind and our mood is much improved. Nutrition, proper eating, we've got to decrease the amount of chemicals and sugar in our foods that we put into our bodies, especially into our kids' bodies. They're so susceptible to this stuff. It's horrible. I'd love to spend more time on that. Massage therapy calms us down. Prayer, meditation, getting your mind right. There's plenty of research on why that's important. Journaling is important. Getting stuff out of your head and onto paper very often allows you to become your own therapist. We can all see how everybody else's problems are messing up their lives, but we can't always see our own and the decisions and the actions and the steps that we're taking. But journaling allows you to be a little more objective because you can write it out, look at it, and go, "Well, what the heck am I doing that for?" And so, and it's almost like that other person observing that person. And the journaling's phenomenal helping people sleep because they write everything out and get it off. Talking to friends, I like that, but don't talk to the wrong one because that could give you even more stress. Reading inspirational books. I am 100% advocate of watching as little news as possible because the news is a business and they're trying to suck you in with drama and they're trying to suck you in with fear to make you keep watching so they can sell ads so they can make money. That's the bottom line. It doesn't matter who's the news channel or what political thing you believe. My news is right. The other news, I don't care about that. They're all the same business. They're all trying to make money, and they're all trying to use you as a way to make more money by making you stay tuned. So they try and suck you in and do that, whether it's a hurricane coming up the coast or a convention that's going on for either party that you want to vote for. And there are people who are at such extreme levels that we have to recommend that you seek counseling. I've done it. I've been there. It has helped me tremendously in my life. Making lists, plans, and prioritizing. But above all else, you have to make time in your life to be healthy. Number one, it is the most important thing in our life, and we never think about it until it's too late. And then it becomes the most important thing in your life. And then you wish you could go back and have created the time to be healthy. And oftentimes, it's too late. Here's the list. I will definitely be glad to share it with anybody who wants it. I'll be glad to answer any questions. We're running out of time. We just have seconds left on this recording. But I just want to let you know that these are things that I use all the time. These things work. But we have to make the time in our day for these things, or we are going to be a statistic.